Welcome to this episode of Just in the City, and I'm your host, Mr. Nelson Okwonna. Today we'll be continuing on the same subject of Christ and righteousness. However, I want to take a look at this from a different perspective, from the perspective of suffering. Christ and righteousness and the perspective of suffering. Now, some might be wondering, why are we discussing this subject within the context of suffering? I would put it this way: suffering is one of those things that depicts a sign of righteousness or lack of it. In other words, we all have this almost unconscious conviction that if I'm suffering or if someone is suffering, then there's an element of unrighteousness to it. So if something happens to you today, one of the first things that will come to your mind is, what did I do wrong? Why me? You want to find a justification for that. So a good text that comes to mind for reading this, for understanding this, is Job in the Bible. Job is a man, the Bible says he was the most righteous man of all the Lord. Now all of a sudden, evil happened to him. And his friends, because they believe this mindset that I just mentioned, that if something wrong happens to you, it must be unrighteous, they were unanimous in their assertion that Job had sinned. So they were quite, they were quite very, clear in their verdict. Job, you cannot be righteous. You cannot be righteous because I've done something wrong. Now, you see this in someone's life. Let's say someone that was raped, which is a very, graphic example. That person always might be asking him or herself, why was I raped? Is it because of how I dressed? Is it because of, I didn't take sufficient precaution? What caused it? There's that tendency to convict yourself. Now, that does not mean that you could not have done something wrong. That does not mean that there's no bad consequences or bad action. But that's not the point. The point I want to make is that it's in our normal psyche, it's in our normal reasoning to assume that whenever there is suffering, there is unrighteousness. And it is not always true. And I believe the entirety of the book of Job is to help us get to that conclusion. It is not always true that a man is suffering because he has done something wrong. It's not always true that the fact that Christ is now our righteousness, and the fact that you've now come to God's righteousness, that you never suffer. It is not always true. You can still indeed suffer despite the provisions of Christ. You can still suffer even when you've done nothing wrong. You can still suffer even when you've gotten everything perfectly right. And that suffering in itself is not a mark of our righteousness. So we continue on the subject of Christ and righteousness. And I was saying earlier, sorry for that distraction, I was saying that Job was suffering and his friends could not accept that he could be suffering unjustly. Because in their reasoning, only bad things happen to bad people. So I would say that Christ's righteousness is a gift of God. And the fact that you come to that righteousness does not mean that you cannot suffer. The fact that you come to that righteousness does not mean that life is going to be a bed of roses. That's not what it means. That's not what it means. So I want to be able to help us to distinguish the suffering that is common to man, regardless of righteousness, and the suffering that is a product of unrighteousness. And sometimes this has to do with whether we are spiritual or we're physical. If I'm spiritual, even when I suffer physical things, even when I suffer physical loss, physical deprivation, when I suffer from a rape, false accusation, lack of goods, lack of money, or when I suffer those kind of stuff, I should know that that is just a suffering of the flesh. That does not in itself mean unrighteousness. And it's good to note that in all the sufferings of Job, God never left him. It was just Job that thought God left him. God never left Job. In other words, a man could be perfectly righteous, and unfortunately, in the case of Job, perfectly in suffering. But his mind can tell him that he's now unrighteous. Let's say, as you know, that something bad can happen to you, just the mere fact that evil has triumphed over you apparently makes you feel bad, makes you feel unrighteous. It's important that we discuss this because so that you can overcome that feeling of unrighteousness when you feel it. For example, just being broke can make you feel like God has left you. You're like, where is God? And I'm broke. There's a part of us that is assaulted by suffering. That part of us is the noble part of us because God made man with so much nobility, so much capacity in himself that it's almost like man is like God in a way. So when man is assaulted by suffering, a part of man tells man that this is not you. This is not you. This is so much beneath you. You're not supposed to be going through this. A part of you is offended, and it gives birth to a feeling of unrighteousness. That part of you that is offended is not the Spirit of God necessarily. That part of that is offended is not necessarily the nature of God. That is your human nature, which is not bad in itself. So I'm saying all this to say that how we respond when we experience suffering, has a lot to do with our understanding of this concept of unrighteousness. I repeat, how we respond when we are assaulted by suffering is a reflection of our understanding of this concept of righteousness. So take for example, something bad has happened to you. You can feel, abandoned by God, offended, and trampled over by the wicked one, that you might just lose your job. Or you might detach yourself, that is your spiritual self, from a scenario and say, yes, my physical self has suffered, but my spiritual self is distinct from that suffering. I'm telling you, gentle ladies who are listening to us today, that it is by that detachment of self that we can actually overcome that. Now, look at what Job said in Job 37, verse 2. Job said, as God lives, he has taken away my judgments, and the Almighty has made my soul bitter. As long as my breath is in me and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips shall not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me that I should justify you. Until I die, I will not retract my integrity from me. I will hold fast my righteousness, I will not let go. My heart shall not shame me, shall not shame me any of my days. Job was saying that, whatever things are telling me, I refuse to accept that I'm guilty. Now, this is something to note. Job got something right in his response to his friend's accusation, but he also got something wrong in his response to God. Job said, friends are not unrighteous. When I said, God is harsh, God is wicked, God is doing away. And when God came, God rebuked his friend and said, you did wrong by accusing Job falsely. But when I said, Job, who the hell do you think you are to come and accuse me? So there are two errors. There are three errors there. There's the error of Job's friend. There's the error that Job could have made, which is to condemn himself, which he refused to do, and his wife told him to do. Job is going to be caused God and that. Then there's the third error which Job eventually did, which is to accuse God of evil. we are all subject to that in suffering. And they are all issues of righteousness. So Job said, I am righteous, which indeed he was. But now, he now said, I'm righteous, God is unjust, in which he was wrong. His friend said, Job is unrighteous, in which they were wrong. So you see, suffering presents a potpourri of choices when it comes to this issue of righteousness and unrighteousness. And something that we experience every day. I'm telling you, when I don't have money, there's a sense of unrighteousness until I intentionally separate myself, physical self, my wallet, my account number, from my spiritual self. I say, hey, you can't get to me. You're just a wallet. You're just an account. For goodness sake, you're just an account. You're just a reflection of Naira and Kobo, not even dollars, Naira and Kobo. So why are you getting to my spirit? So suffering has that ability to, impact on our sense of righteousness. And of course, why is it important to have this conversation? Because once that sense of righteousness is impacted, many things take their bearing from that. Once a man feels that he's unrighteous, the chances that he'll be unrighteous still is more. So those who feel that, oh, God is going, I've done something wrong, that's why things are happening to me. They might justify his wrong action. They might justify his stealing, his killing. People justify so many things because of this sense of unrighteousness. A woman is raped, for example, and she wants to kill herself. Because someone saw her, she feels already traumatized. But beyond the fact that she's traumatized, she feels guilty for what she shouldn't be guilty of. Someone said, and that was St. Augustine, he said, if a man rapes a woman, he said that sin has been committed and two persons were involved, but only one person is guilty. If a man rapes a woman, sin has been committed, two persons are involved, but only one person is guilty. There are certain things that you go through that involve more than a single person, but only one person is guilty. And I can come to Jeremiah. Jeremiah is passing behind the camera. I can come to Jeremiah now. Start fighting. He's defending him. I beat him. I beat him. Someone come and say they fought. True or false? They fought. Two persons were involved in that fighting, but only one person is guilty. But Jeremiah began to wonder, what in the world? What in the world did I do? Is it that I was looking at him somehow? Jeremiah starts feeling guilty. Jeremiah might now say, okay, I will stone his head. Jeremiah may not feel comfortable even telling people about the fact that he was beaten. Because they'll ask him, what were you doing? And they're going to beat you. You mean the just came and said beating you? So Jeremiah is definitely going to be, his righteousness already is questioned. We're saying that threat, that sense of unrighteousness is not genuine. That feeling of guilt that the rape victim feels is not genuine. The reason why we feel like that is that we want to find logic, we want to find meaning, we want to find sense in what is happening in our world. And our normal sense tells us that good things happen to bad people, happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. That is our normal sense. So whenever we experience bad, we're like, this thing is not adding up, I must have done something wrong. The entire book of Job exists to tell us that the best man on earth, the most righteous man on earth, will suffer for nothing, for what is not his fault. And that is the message I have for you today. This talk today is not about suffering, it's about righteousness, but they are related. A righteous man can suffer for long, and he's suffering not because he was unrighteous, he's suffering perhaps because he's righteous. And I'm telling you, this suffering is not sweet. Jesus Christ himself, in going through that suffering himself, said, Father, please, if it's your will, take away this cup from me. It is not a sweet thing. So when we're discussing something that is fun, even just like, Father, please, can I just escape it? So all of us want to escape it because it's not a good feeling. But God has, revealed to us in His Word that such can happen. Now, that's what the Bible said, that when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake, say, rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. Did it say if? Say when? So there might be times when you suffer for doing something wrong, right? So suffering may not be somebody oppressing you. It might just be that you made a good decision not to cheat, not to, do some corrupt things. And because of those good decisions, you don't just have enough money to meet your needs. And because you are suffering, something that telling you that you must be stupid, you must be unrighteous. How come with all this your goodness, you don't have more? And if you're not careful, you start listening to that voice. We are saying, separate the two. A righteous man can suffer. Now, that does not mean that the righteous man will always suffer. It means that he can suffer. That's why as Christians, we are supposed to take every of our experience to God, good and bad. So what I suffer, when Job was suffering, the ideal thing to do is to go to God and say, God, I commit my suffering to you. You are a good God. You are just. You will save the righteous. You will save the needy. Do you understand? You will save the needy. Go to God and claim His righteousness. Claim His justice. So when I'm going through suffering, I say, God, you are a faithful God. God, you will save the righteous party. God, you will not allow the righteous to see corruption. You understand? I know you will save me. So every suffering of the righteous is temporal. I repeat, even if the righteous man dies, he will be resurrected. And death could be many things. Could be bills could die, a life could end, something could die. But check it. Even if the righteous man himself dies, he will rise again. So for every righteous man who is going through suffering, there is resurrection. And in the case of Job, we saw that. So if a righteous man dies in his suffering, he will rise again. And I think this is a word for you, or for someone. Maybe what has died is your virginity, your sense of pride that you are a virgin. Someone raped you, or maybe you were involved in something that took away your virginity. There's resurrection. Or maybe your sense of decency has been offended by your experiences. There's resurrection. I don't know what it is that has happened to you that is now questioning your righteousness. A suffering that you have gone through is beginning to make you feel that, this is self-inflicted. Yes, it must have been self-inflicted. You must even be the rapist in this case. But the point is this: when a man comes to righteousness, or when a righteous man comes to suffering, there's resurrection. Last week we spoke about when you come and repent and forgive and ask for forgiveness. Even though you're a rapist, you will forgive. Now we're discussing about the victim of an evil heart. If you're that victim, even when they self-inflicted injuries, I tell you the truth, there is resurrection. So for the person who has suffered unrighteously, for someone who has suffered righteously, whichever, there's resurrection. There's resurrection. You can rise. You can rise. That's the point I want to make. You can rise. There's resurrection in that righteousness that Christ provides. Job was restored. And some might wonder, God, why did he have to go through the suffering in the first place? Why? Yes, he was restored, but why did he have to suffer in the first place? Well, I may not answer that question, I don't have enough to to that question. But the point is that regardless, God can glorify himself in our experiences. And we must wait for him. We must hold on to him for his resurrection. I hope this has blessed you. This is a word for someone. Hold on to it. And don't allow their suffering to make you feel condemned, to make you feel unrighteous. There is hope for you, and you can rise from everything that the devil has thrown at you. We love you. God bless you. And see you next week. Bye for now.
It's Jesus in the city. This is hoping that you have been blessed by the program Jesus in the City, brought to you by partners of Heart and Art Foundation. To receive materials on the subject discussed today, visit our website on www.heartandart.org. For your questions, responses, prayer, or to be part of this project, call or WhatsApp us on this number:
0908 182 1702.
You can also email us on
mail@heartandart.org.
Till we come your way, same time, same station, next week. Do have a victorious and successful week ahead.